Hello, everyone. Welcome to this it's the second IABA event of this year.
The second event, the
Of
first
the-
one was the New Year's drink. So that
Of
was
the
summer.
Brussels chapter, that is. And the title of today is How Business Analysis Can Make Change Tick by our speaker, Philip Hendricks. And I will announce him. First of all, we thank Smalls for hosting this event in this room and for drinks and the coffee and hospitality and everything. And Quezo, I don't know what they do.
Queazo is our sponsor from the very beginning. When we initiated the chapter over 10 years ago, he was willing to sponsor us, which is of course useful as a non-profit organization. It's useful to have some financial backing. So big thank you for our sponsor of all times, Queazo. And Philippe de Sutter was on his way, the founder of Queazo. So normally you should be able to meet him later on as well.
Okay, well, I just hold like this now, like a microphone. Okay, so, and then we announce our speaker of today. He also happens to be the president of the IIBA Brussels chapter, which is quite convenient, of course. He is an innovating BA. I think he will talk about that later, what that is. Also a coach for many BAs, a trainer, a speaker, as you see, because he's here speaking, and a consultant. He helps to organize the BA and Beyond conference in Belgium and I think also Netherlands now. It's now dual country hybrid event also. And he has a can-do mentality. Indeed, that's how I know him. But first, I think he should explain us what is a BA innovator.
Well, I was first of all intrigued. Let me move so that I'm also visible. Yes. I was first of all intrigued by other BAs that are active online, like on LinkedIn. You have the cyber BA, you have the Brazilian BA, you have the holistic BA. And I was thinking maybe I need to also mention myself as a kind of BA. What kind of BA could I be? And then I thought I like to work on projects where there is some innovative side to it, new products, new features, new services. And I also like to inspire people to look at business analysis from a different perspective. So I also would like to innovate business analysis as a profession. So that's why I thought innovating BA fits me. But I didn't call myself the innovating BA because I doubt I'm the only one doing that. So I was a bit modest. I leave that up to my my clients to decide.
Okay, and then you should also talk about your book. I think many of us have a book somewhere in drawer unfinished, and you finished one.
I did finish one, so thanks for mentioning it. I actually brought a few copies for sale, if you'd be interested, but you can also browse them and see if you are interested in getting them. All joking aside, this was a very ambitious endeavor. Not only because writing a book takes a lot of time and energy, writing a book with two people, I've written it with a co-author, is convenient in a way, but also challenging because you have to collaborate and agree on how to write it. And we didn't write another textbook on business analysis, but we wrote a business novel. So it's a story about a BA working in retail, on a new project, a new challenge. So if you think that's a nice way to get introduced to some business analysis concepts with a different angle, some things on change and innovation, feel free to check it out.
So I think the next slide, we dive into the contents now. Questions, thoughts, comments. Well, those who have questions already can ask them now. If not, we look at the presentation.
Okay, thank you very much. And by the way, I would also like to introduce Niels officially because he's a new team member and it's the first time he's co-hosting, co-organizing an event for us. So welcome, Niels, on board of the Brussels chapter.
Thank you very much. Here's your.
Yes, thanks. Let me switch to the slides. Okay, so welcome everyone. Also welcome to the people online. If you have questions, feel free to ask them in the chat. We will follow up on your questions and we will always try to make it as interactive as possible in a hybrid way insofar that logistics allow us to do so. We had some technical hiccups, but we've worked around those. maybe first of all, notice that it is a statement, not a question. I believe that business analysis can help make change stick. And part of that is this, or another part of that is the statement or the question. This is a question: are you a change maker? Would you consider yourself a change maker, yes or no? And I'll quickly switch to Menti so that the people online can also vote. And you can either go to the website or use the QR code and vote whether you agree or disagree with the statement. Are you a change maker?
You have very strong interest, so people might.
I'll give people a few seconds to vote, and then I will show the results. You vote here also, yes. Ah, sorry if that was not clear. By the way, we are recording this, so the recording and the slides will be shared afterwards as well. Let me see if we are getting some answers. Okay, that's quite a clear statistic. So almost everyone says yes, you considers him or herself a change maker. Just 2 people don't. And I think this is correct. I think that most of us here in some kind of business analysis role or something related, project management, product ownership, maybe development or testing or user experience design. I think all of us are change makers for 2 reasons. The first reason, and I'm going to switch back to the presentation. The first reason is that every project is a change project. We are working on projects. In the broad sense, project could also be I'm developing a new product or developing features for a certain product. That's also a project, whether you call it project or product development. That's another discussion. But you typically do that work because you want to change something. You don't do a project because you want to make sure that the organization stays exactly the same. That's usually not the case. And so I consider project to be almost synonymous with change projects. And everyone on the team that is working on that project, for me, is a change maker. Take, for example, a BA professional. If you look at the definition by IIBA's body of knowledge, business analysis body of knowledge, it says business analysis is the practice of enabling change, and then some additional details. And you are, in your analysis, checking what is the as-is situation, what is the to-be situation, what is the change we are going to make. So you are effectively shaping that change. But also, if you are a user experience designer, you decide how your piece of software will look like. And so you decide how the change will be impacting the future users. If you are a developer, you decide on whether you will invest on optimizing something for speed or not. And that decision will influence how big or how small the change is. Because ideally you optimize everything for speed, but that costs time, that costs money. And so it's not always possible, you make choices. As a tester, you decide which bugs are critical to be solved and which you think the user can live with. So there also you are impacting the change and you are, in effect, a change maker. The problem that I saw for myself is that while I am working on changes in my career, in my projects, I am not a change management expert. So what tools, what techniques, what tips and tricks can I use to make me better at not just defining the change, but introducing the change in the organization to the users? And so I started looking around throughout my career for tips, techniques, tricks. And what I realized was that actually I am experienced in change. If you look at yourself, you have gone through a number of changes big changes and small changes. Changes that you chose for yourself. For example, you decided what you wanted to study. You decided where you wanted to work. You decided to move together with your partner, have children or not. Those are big changes. Some changes were inflicted upon you. Maybe a change in the project because people were not needed or the project had to be stopped for whatever reason out of your choice. That's a change that you are impacted by, but that you didn't have a choice about. And in the work you do, you influence other people, you change other people, you impact what happens with other people. And so all of these things make all of us, in my opinion, a change expert. You could think about a change that happened to you, whether it was by choice or not, and consider, how did it affect me? What effect did it have on me? How did I feel about that change? How was I informed about the change? And so thinking about these experiences consciously, I think helps us all to think more consciously about the changes we introduce in the organizations we work. And so for me, that's already a very big advantage, a very good starting point in becoming better at handling change, at introducing change in organizations. Nevertheless, I'm an analyst. I try to look at things using tools and techniques and diagrams. So I went looking for some of these techniques to see how can they help me become better, more conscious in handling change, in introducing change. And I will walk you through a number of these and hopefully introduce you a few new ways of looking at it as we go. So the first one is the ADKAR method. Who knows ADKAR? Okay, already a few people. It's actually a method that I used for my first project as a consultant in the same organization as Patricia worked back then. We discovered it was about 12 years ago, or 14 even, where we wanted to change the process for onboarding new independent people. Originally, it was focusing on the mandatory administration to get someone started as an independent. And we wanted to introduce a sales aspect, because these independent people are interesting prospects for insurances. And we followed more or less this process in a way. Yeah? We tried to create some awareness. Why is this change needed? From an organizational perspective, it's interesting financially if we can sell more insurances. But that did not really create awareness with the people actually doing the administrative work, that we also wanted to do some sales work. But another thing did create the awareness, the fact that as an independent, you can't rely on an employer's insurance or on government support. You have to take care of your own insurances to a larger extent. And that is something that, that triggered our customers, our internal customers, the people doing the administration for the new independents, that triggered them to think, okay, this makes sense. That made them aware of the value of the change that we wanted to introduce. So that's the first step. Second step, create a desire. Once they learned how valuable this could be for their clients, some of them started to develop a desire. And only then, most people are ready to effectively be interested in knowing how to change, knowing what is the new way of working, what is the new process going to be like, how do I, being a non-salesperson, how do I sell, how do I introduce these products to my clients, to my customers. If you skip the first two and you immediately try to sell, in a way, people the knowledge to work in a new way, there is a good chance that people don't like it, because they don't know, they don't have the context, or they haven't been going through a number of steps to really understand, to really value the change you are trying to introduce. And it goes on, this is theoretical knowledge, then you go towards the ability. I'm actually able to apply the knowledge. And finally, some people will reinforce the change. They will be a kind of champion. They will explain the change to others, lead the way. And the key message here is you have to take your time to go through these steps. Some people will go through them quickly. For some people, it will take more time, but jumping right away to ability is probably not going to work for most people. And this is interesting for me as a BA, because it gives me a kind of step-by-step road to introducing a change. However, it is a rather rational approach. What are the steps? That doesn't tell me what it actually does to people change. What is the emotional side of change? And so I went looking for other techniques and I found the SARA model, which explains how my emotions evolve over time when I am confronted with a change. And I think COVID is a very good example here. First, you go into shock. This isn't happening, this can't be true. And it's actually, in a way, sometimes a positive state of mind in the sense that it gives you a lot of energy to work with or fight the change. But it's, as people start to realize that it's actually real, emotions evolve towards anger, resistance. We don't want that COVID, we don't want face masks and so on. I think we all know people that very clearly went through these emotions. Ultimately, hopefully, if you want to change to be successful, leading to acceptance and hope when people start seeing how the future, how the new situation can actually work. And what I find interesting is that it complements the ADKAR model because it gives me the emotional view on how people go through these different steps. And ultimately, people are emotional rather than rational. So if you don't take into account these emotions, you will probably have a big challenge making the change happen, making people accept the change that you want them to go through. Does that make sense? Still, while I find this a useful addition, it still doesn't make me feel or experience what change actually does to people. I can use this model rationally. I can think of moments where I felt anger or resistance when I started feeling hope. But how does it actually feel if change is inflicted upon people? Can we experience that? I think we can. And in order to do so, we need to talk about spaghetti. Here's the spaghetti. And if you don't like spaghetti, pick some other food that you really like. I have a half Italian wife, so spaghetti makes a lot of sense to me. Imagine that you come home after a long and hard but satisfying day of work, or after doing sports at the gym. You have worked hard, you feel energized, satisfied because of the results. You sit down and your partner has created very nice hot spaghetti sauce. You can almost smell it. You really want to dive into it, not literally. And she or he gives you a plate of pasta. She takes the bowl of sauce, and right before she pours the sauce over your spaghetti, she or he picks a brand new toilet brush out of its package and stirs the sauce really good. And then they give you the sauce. Enjoy your meal. Who says, wonderful, this is great spaghetti? Or who says, I kind of felt at least a little bit strange here. A little bit strange, yeah? There's nothing wrong with the spaghetti sauce. It's a brand new tool, never used before. Why would it feel strange? That's what change does to people. It feels at least strange or uncomfortable, and sometimes you go really into physical resistance against it. And the reason is simple. We ask people, whenever we introduce change, we ask people to rewire something in their brain. We typically link a toilet brush with don't eat, right? And it's not so easy for our brain to make a connection, change towards toilet brush, safe to eat. And that's rewiring, or the fact that we need rewiring, is giving us this physical sensation of going into resistance, maybe even have fear. And fear is a very powerful emotion, blocking people to think rationally. And people that are afraid of a change will not be open to your rational arguments. You first need to find a way to take away that fear. So whenever you are introducing a change in your project, which is basically all the time, remember spaghetti, because that's what you're doing to people. You're giving them spaghetti that you have stirred with a toilet brush. So one way to help us talk about this, I think one useful way is the empathy map. The empathy map, some of you also may know, is used often in product management when defining new products. And when you discuss with users, okay, if we talk about this product, how you use this product, what are you saying, what are you thinking, what are you doing, what are you feeling? It's a very good technique in product development, but it's an equally valid technique in change management. I'm introducing a few potentially new concepts to you. I'm effectively changing how you look at change and business analysis, how you look at your work. What are you now saying? What are you thinking? What are you doing? What are you feeling? And if you talk to people about the upcoming change using this tool, you will better understand their ideas, their feelings, their reactions, their concerns. For example, when I give this talk, you could be saying, someone could be saying, I was expecting something different in this talk. Could be. Someone could be thinking, oh, this guy is crazy talking about spaghetti and toilet brushes. Where does he get these crazy ideas? Or, duh, this is obvious. I already know all these tools. That information helps me understand how big the change is for my audience. Someone might lean forward. Someone might start yawning. That's useful feedback. Someone might feel empowered. As a BA, I have a lot of power on changing people. That's useful. Someone else might be overwhelmed by the fact, do I also have to take into account, on top of all the other things, process analysis, screen design, whatever, also think about the change? That's a little bit too much. And so using this empathy map is a very useful technique to understand what the change is doing to your customers. So I'd like to invite you to come up with maybe something related to this talk. What would you position in, say, think, do, or feel? And I also invite the online audience to add their thoughts in the chat. Is there any reaction that you have? Yes?
It's not easy to ask what they feel.
It's easy to ask, I think. Maybe people are not always comfortable to express their feelings. Absolutely. But then for me, that means you need to give them time and not just push the change through, because you don't know how they feel. And if they are not feeling positive about it, potentially, someone is not willing to share his or her feelings, I'd say there is a good chance that they feel not so positive about the change. So there's a reason for you to slow down and create a safe environment where you can have that conversation. Good point, thank you. Any reactions, personal reactions about what do you do, what do you think about this? Maybe from someone online?
We have a change equals a lot of time.
It takes time. It often does, absolutely.
Anything else? My personal thought was that when I'm as a BA confronted with change in projects, is that we as a BA, we're often unfortunately put in a position where we have to drive this change, right? Because we talk immediately to the users and try to get some requirements, and they're either they try to like bribe you and convince you that we should do the change, or they should do their way, and you have to convince them otherwise. And you're often the bad guy because you're the one who did this. That's
true, and it's important to realize that you can't run away from it. You can't act as if you are just a messenger. You are, for the people, the person bringing the change. So you have to take up part of the responsibility of making the change happen. Okay, so a few techniques that I think are really helpful in making that change come true as a BA. The first one is deep listening. It's about listening not to capture requirements and prioritize them. It's about listening to understand, what is this doing to someone? Why is someone convinced that solution A is good or bad? Why is he proposing something and not something else? Why is he agreeing with something or disagreeing with something? And we try to understand what is the reasoning inside the minds of people. A question that I think works very well is, why will it work or why will it not work? Someone is convinced that a solution will either work or not work. Why will it work? And there is an emphasis on will here because these people are convinced it will work or not work. Initially, I wrote here, why would it work? But that's not the question. It's why will it work? To focus ourselves on the fact that this person is convinced of something, and you want to understand why he or she is convinced. Another technique that is really useful, and this is something you can definitely also try at home in your personal situation. It's a technique that comes from improvisation theater, which is yes and. In a lot of conversations, we say yes, but. And that effectively blocks the conversation. I don't like this change. Yes, but you will have to. That person is not going to come back with feedback anymore. If you say yes and, you force yourself to think in a positive way about what the other person is saying and to build on top of it. And it's a very simple experiment. So next time at your home at a table, experiment and answer every person that asks you a question or says something, say yes and build on top of it and see what happens. Feel how it triggers you to think differently about what that person is saying, to really understand it and see how you can co-create something. And so deep listening for me is a key aspect, and as BAs, we're already good listeners, so we can probably take it up a notch, another notch.
I think related to that, we have a question or a remark from PJ.
Yes.
Who says a crucial element in ADKAR is the D. The individual person needs to make a conscious choice to go forward. It says, beware of the brave face population. So I guess that means people who act like they want to, but they don't want to.
Yes, and that's a good comment. That is definitely not easy to detect. I think there the soft skills and the deep listening definitely comes into play. Yeah, is this person really engaged, really desiring, or just acting as if? A second technique or approach is what I call make it safe. Can we create an environment in which people feel safe to think about this change, to start working along the lines of the new process? Sometimes the change is too big, but we can introduce a small step that kind of eases people into it. For example, I worked for Euroconsumers Testaankoop Testachat across the road here. And for a certain project, they wanted to do a survey with real potential customers to get feedback whether or not that new service that they were thinking of was a good idea. But the people in the organization felt reluctant. They felt it was kind of tricky to go outside and ask people about a product they weren't even sure they were going to build. That felt very unsafe. So that person found a way to sneak it into the organization, to sneak it into the team. He did a survey internally. One day, he took the survey, a lot of copies, paper copies, went to the front door of the office, and everyone that came in received a copy. And he got the feedback, and he used that as an example to show how valuable it can be to have a survey and capture that information, but also that it's actually not that risky. So we found a safe environment for the team, for the organization to do a first experiment, to do a first piece of user research, if you will. And that worked, and that kind of eased them into going outside with a survey the next time. So what is that safe space that you can start to introduce your change? And a tagline that I really like in this context is, what is good enough for now and safe enough to try? It doesn't have to be the entire change that we believe is necessary. It's a first step that is good enough to initiate a change. And it is safe enough for my environment to try out. And that is a conversation that you can have with your stakeholders. You don't have to think of this all by yourself. You can have the conversation with your stakeholders. Okay, we have a few concerns. Those are valid. What would be good enough for now to take a first step forward and safe enough for everyone to try? What environment, what context, and so on. A third, or additional to this, a way to better understand how quickly people can move forward, what people find interesting, what people are reluctant to do, is make this diagram with your team. We want to introduce a few things. We have a few ideas of changes. Maybe some of these things some people are already doing, and we can build upon that. Maybe there are a few things that people say, this is a really great idea. Let's do this. Let's do this right now. That's great. You can move forward and make the change happen. But for some things, people may say, okay, I need to think about this. I'm not sure if this is going to work for me here in this organization, for my customer, whatever. Or no way, this is too far-fetched. We're never going to do that. It's never going to work. By using this kind of diagram, you create a conversation around the concerns people have. You have a starting point where you can start introducing the change, because these are things people already do or feel comfortable with. And that is a first stepping stone to introduce further changes down the road. And it gives you also something to talk about. Why does someone say no way? Maybe he or she had a bad experience in the past where it didn't work well. Okay, how can we make the new experience different? So it's a good conversation starter that you can easily apply on the spot in any meeting. You don't need a lot of material for it. You just draw this on a flip chart and you're good to go. A third aspect that I really like is making sure people know why we are doing this. Linking back to the awareness, keep your own, but also there, the team's eyes on the prize. What is it we are trying to achieve? What is the goal we are trying to achieve? Because ultimately that should be the driver for the change. If people are convinced of the goal, they will try to find ways to make the change happen. But sometimes we get stuck in thinking about a solution that doesn't work well or that doesn't feel right, and we forget about that goal. Put people's focus back on that goal, and they should start to embrace the change that you want to introduce. And one of the techniques that I absolutely like is, first of all, ask people what would have to be true. If we want to make this change happen, what would have to be true? It's an interesting question because it's a positive one. It makes people think positively about, if you want to achieve that goal, this is what needs to be put in place. And you are starting to create with people the change, co-create it. That's a question, a conversation starter. A visual technique is benefits mapping, and you have different variations. The one that I show here is impact mapping, where you have the clear goal. The details here don't really matter, and the link is in the slides. We are trying to achieve, this is a gaming company that's trying to achieve a reduced transaction cost by 10%. And it lists a number of things it's going to do or want to do, changes it wants to introduce to achieve that goal. But this version of the benefits map explicitly states the different roles that are involved or that should be involved. So it kind of focuses on who is going to do what, contribute what to the change we want to achieve. And it keeps the eyes of all these people, of all these roles, on the prize, on the goal you are trying to achieve in a very visual way. So 3 things that help me understand the change and start getting people on board to make that change happen. Go create that change with them, taking into account their concerns, creating a safe space with them and for them. However, I think we need to go one step further. All of these techniques help me as a BA to understand the change and the difficulty of the change and the resistance and make it happen anyway. But it still feels like I'm managing the change. I'm kind of pushing people through the change. I'm doing it in a more collaborative way, which is good. I may be adjusting my pace to what people are willing and able to handle, which is good. But I'm still, or at least the people around me, managers, project managers, stakeholders, are still often thinking, what can we do to make the resistance smaller and to make the change go faster, right? But if it's a big change, it's not going to be small, the resistance, and it's not going to go fast. So is there something we can do? Is there a next step that we can take? Can we find something else to think about this differently? And I think there is, which is being aware first of the fact that people don't resist change, they resist being changed. Or at least that's the statement that Mr. Stange made. So I'm going to ask you the question, whether or not you agree. Yes, there it is. So you can use Mentimeter again and say whether you agree or disagree with the statement, people don't resist change, they resist being changed.
Philip, we have a question to put back the QR code or the code to the Menti.
I can, it should pop
But
up.
it's on top, no? But maybe it's too small for people to see. Yeah.
And the results seem to be a little bit more balanced here. 2/3 agrees with the statement. People resist being changed, that change pushed onto people. 1/3 says no. I think sometimes people just resist change, which is fair. And I think it also depends on the person and the circumstances. But it's still, the statement still triggered me to think about, okay, how can we make, how can we kind of remove that resistance? How can we kind of really involve, engage, maybe even empower people to make change themselves? So let me switch back to the presentation. And a first realization that I had was often we use this kind of diagram to decide, to analyze how important people are in a project. And I often see that customers and operational staff, they don't have a lot of power over the project. They don't decide what the money is being invested in. They don't decide that much on the features. They kind of have to deal with things the way the people here with high power in the organization, in the project decide. And maybe that is not the entire story. Because ultimately, these groups of people, the customers, will decide whether something is valuable for them or not, whether they like to use it or not. The operational staff will make the experience for the customer good or bad, depending on how well they like a new system or a new process. And so maybe we should consider giving them more power, involving them in the process, co-creation with them, and not just doing 1 or 2 interviews and then taking that input and using that to shape the to-be process or the to-be software, but actually involving them in the projects from beginning to end. And when they co-create the change, they will also be more interested to actually reinforce the change towards their colleagues, for example, or use word of mouth as a customer to explain to other potential customers how good this or that service or this or that product is. So whenever you create this kind of diagram and you see there are a few groups of people that seem to be having low power, is that really true? How important are they to make the change happen? That's the first thing. And that triggers us as a BA to take up a different role. Because the more people we involve, the more difficult it's going to be to bring all that information together and turn it into something that we can actually use to build the new process or the new piece of software or whatever. And so that means that we need to become what I call a spider. Traditionally, we are often perceived as the bridge between business and IT. But as the bridge, you quickly become the bottleneck. Maybe if you are a spider, you can create a web of connections between people that somehow have to collaborate on making this change happen. And you don't necessarily need to be part of every conversation. You just need to make sure that the right people are connected to each other so that they can make the change happen, that they can define the change, the new way of working. And of course, as a BA, you make sure that you facilitate this conversation where needed, that you create, for example, a psychologically safe environment to have a conversation where people can express their concerns, their feelings. You might even use one of the diagrams we saw earlier. But you are in the role of a facilitator more so than someone that does all the analysis work him or herself, in order not to become the bottleneck and to really empower people to define the change as they see is suitable. And maybe one step further, or adding on top of that, is a final realization. One of the models for change that is often used is the unfreeze, change, and refreeze model. We unfreeze the as-is situation, we introduce a change, and then we refreeze it, and then it becomes stable again. The problem is that it doesn't become stable, or at least whenever you are here, a new situation or a new need or opportunity pops up requiring you to go back to unfreeze, make a new change, and refreeze. And every time you need to unfreeze, you're going to introduce change to people, and it's going to be hard. So can we kind of make this process much shorter, the changes much smaller? Maybe can we ask ourselves, can we challenge ourselves to come up with a system that is easily changeable by the people themselves? Like, and where the design is built in, the changeability is built into the design, like these caterpillars that can transform into a butterfly. So this is a really profound change, but it is built into the system. And this may seem a little bit vague. You might go, oh, he's crazy again. But a very simple example is parameters in software. Say we are an insurance company, we manage claims, and when typically every claim below, say, 2,500 euros is handled automatically, accepted or rejected automatically. Anything above 2,500 euros needs to go through someone's hands. But at some point in time, things may become very busy, and we might not be able to manage the influx of claims anymore. So in the software, we can change the 2,500 to 5,000, and the process has changed. And there is no fundamental different way of working for people. People just have the power to change the process, to tweak the numbers in order to make it work for them and for their customers. And that's an example of designing changeability into the solutions we create. It's a simple example, it's a basic example, but I think it's a relevant example. The challenge here is that these changes are pre-programmed or predefined. And I think people typically are capable of doing more than what is pre-programmed or predefined. And there I like to use stories and metaphors in my presentations. I found this interesting story about this flower in China, flower on the left, which looks great and which people picked all the time. As a consequence, the risk was that there were fewer and fewer flowers of these kinds. So the flower morphed into a new form. This is the same flower. It's not that, but it's not pretty anymore. It changed itself into an appearance that is not interesting for people to pick anymore. That is a powerful change. Can we design this kind of changeability into the organizations we work for? Do we think when we write down the requirements for a new process or a new piece of software, do we think about the changeability? For example, one of the customers I've worked for, they allowed people in the customer support center to manage a certain amount of money. And they could spend that money to customers that were complaining or were giving them a hard time or were saying, thank you for helping me. And they could spend the entire amount of money on one single customer. And they had a certain sum for the period of a year. Or they could decide, we send flowers to this customer and we send a wellness voucher to that customer. And they could decide for themselves within certain constraints, within certain boundaries set by the organization. They were able to freely think about how to use that money to improve the customer's experience, to increase the customer value. That is changeability in a way designed into the solution, empowering people to take care of it themselves. And they change their behavior depending on the time of year, depending on the type of request, depending on what kind of customer comes to them with their question, with their support question. They can change how they respond. They can change if and how much money they spend in what way for that customer. Yeah, so you kind of design changeability into the process and you give ownership, you empower people to do so. And of course, you need to give people something like information, data. How do customers react on certain actions, for example, could be a piece of data that you provide to help them make better choices, to help them decide better on the changes they have power over. But you design the freedom into the system. And I think that's a valid question we as BAs can ask ourselves. How can we design that freedom into the systems we design? Where is it relevant to do so? Where is it maybe not so interesting? Where is it maybe risky? Because ultimately, I believe that if we answer that question, we can create a situation where change isn't strange anymore, where people take ownership of the change themselves, because we've introduced a context to them in which they can do so, in which they are knowing the price and knowing the goal we are striving towards, incentivized, empowered to decide on changes that they believe will be for the better. And with that, I close my presentation and I'm open for any questions you may have, whether it is here or online. Yes.
In my experience, change management is a lot of, or most of the times, carried by the project manager itself, him or person. So, is that a common way of working everywhere, or is it something that a BA can take ownership of really take the initiative to take the ownership of that, or is it really still more a project management topic?
Yeah. So the question for the people online is, is it often
No,
the
no,
project?
go ahead. I just want to tell you, please repeat the question. for
Yeah,
people online.
okay. Often the project manager is the person dealing with the change management. Should the BA take ownership of that, or should the BA collaborate on introducing that change? I think absolutely yes. Whenever as a BA you talk to people, you are effectively introducing a change. You are telling people what's going to happen, telling people why some change might be needed, asking people what they think of the old system, what they would want from the new system. You are making the change happen. You are managing the change in some way. So you can't stay away from it. And because we know so much about the contents, I think we're also well placed, well positioned to do so. And we can easily sneak it into the techniques that we have, that change aspect. So yes, absolutely. And I think it's good to do it together with your project manager and or a change manager for the larger projects often. But yes, absolutely.
Because it's a lot of the times a formal track, side track, maybe in some projects, that the project manager takes responsibility of. But I have the impression that for a BA, then it's more in an informal way that you try to introduce the different techniques or tools for change.
It's two thoughts. Sometimes you say it's a sidetrack. I think it should not be. It is an essential part of what you are doing. So it's not something on top of or something you can add at the end. Oh, let's do some training. Then it's too late. You have to involve people from the beginning. And whenever you apply an analysis technique, thinking about this or looking at this through a change lens helps you find out where are potential issues. And those are issues that your project manager needs to be aware of to be able to adjust the plan, project plan, to make that change happen.
Yeah, we have online also somebody who agrees. PJ says, and people in resistance are very sensitive to incoherent communication coming from those that bring the change. Yeah? So for instance, here the BA or the PM. So important that all the team care for change, in his humble opinion.
Yeah, everyone in the team is a change maker. Absolutely. Yeah, I agree with that. Yes.
But sometimes the management doesn't seem to see the importance of the change management. or they look at it as we said, oh, we will give some training at the end. So the first A and the D of the outcome they completely ignore and they start immediately at the K. And if you propose as a BA to start earlier because you know it's important, and they say that's a waste of time. We work already together for a long time. Everybody knows what the benefits are that we're trying to achieve, so it's not necessary to do it. Do you have a technique how you can convince the management of the importance of the A and the D also, and that it's not because you work already a long time together that everyone sees the benefits the same way that they do?
So the question is often management, project management, stakeholders, sponsors of the project don't really believe that the awareness, the desire, creation of the awareness of the desire is important, that you just want to dive into creating, giving the knowledge through training, for example. Do I have a technique to counter that, that position or that statement? But I'd say that early on in the project, you will have a first contact with your future customer. At that point in time, you can try to sense what is the awareness, using, for example, one of the techniques we mentioned here. And you gather that feedback from a couple of customers. You're not officially spending time on creating awareness. You're gathering information. And one of the results, one of the insights from that information is, this is the level of awareness. Is this what you expected? Do you think this is good enough? Or should we spend some more time on creating that awareness? And so if you ask for additional time and money to spend on creating the awareness, I think the answer will often be, rather not. But if you kind of sneak it into other things you have to do anyway, when you gather information to shape that change, then you might be able to make it much more tangible why it is needed to spend time on it. So that would be my advice. Being sneaky. But you can formulate it in a more positive way. You know what it means to do business analysis, and you know that constant awareness of change is part of that. So you gather that information together with all the other pieces of information you get, and you kind of happen to discover that the awareness might not be as high as people hope it would be. That's interesting. And if management then says, we don't care, we just go ahead for whatever reason, then you at least know that, and then you can communicate that, and there might be a valid reason for it, but then it has been discussed and then it's clear for everyone. Okay. Yes.
To continue that, maybe creating a book or first project demonstrate or not that the A and the D is important. You can test it and validate your assumptions.
That is an example of creating a safe space, of creating a first step forward, something that is good enough for now and safe enough to try. Yes, absolutely. That's a good approach. Yeah, creating a POC, so for the people online, creating a proof of concept to do a first kind of smaller attempt for a smaller group of people is a way of creating that safe context where you can learn from. Yeah.
Also to get the buy-in, so that people that are first convinced can convince others.
Yes, to get the buy-in, or, and that is the deep listening, to learn that you don't have the buy-in. And because if you only speak about, let's get the buy-in, you are still in the approach of managing people through change. And we have to kind of be alert ourselves that we don't step into that, fall into that trap. To be really open, listen without judgment, listen without deciding, yes, and to discover people are not ready yet. Yeah.
A technique that I use personally is that I try, when I do requirement or analysis, I try to put in my own conclusion the feedback from themselves, from the proposals, when it's possible, naturally. Because then, after it's more complicated for them to say that's not a good product, because they help me to design it. So, in fact, it's part of themselves when it's possible. And sometimes it's not possible, but this helps a a lot for change management because you have quicker buy-in because something they didn't decide, but most of the team, they were part of it. So that's
Yeah.
important.
Yeah. So for people online, what the person is saying is that in the deliverables explicitly mention things that your stakeholders have said to you, because then the deliverable becomes owned by them as well. You co-created the deliverable; it's part of their work, so it's more difficult in a way to say in the end, I don't agree, and you can still say I made a mistake, but that's different. Yeah, absolutely. No, but these are all pieces of the puzzle, and you have to use a different combination depending on the context. Yeah. Thank you for sharing.
As a to come back to the proof of concept, just a small remark that I just thought of, is that if depending on the kind of people you have in your audience for the proof of concept and your, I would say, manage expectations, because they might see it not as a proof of concept, but as just the thing that they're going to use, and they're going to tell everybody, maybe bad, maybe good, or they will be so resistant to the change, like no, it's going to be complete garbage, and we don't want. And so make sure you have people who understand what is a POC, and that is not the end goal, but it's still research phase, how to say.
Yeah, managing expectations.
We have also a remark online. In an ideal world, the business customer side, to the business being the customer side, would play the change management role. In the real world, I see the BA then a supplier side as a very good proxy to play that role.
Yes, well, I would come back to my initial statement that everyone is a change maker. Everyone that is working on a project in whatever role is to some extent introducing, shaping the change. And it's important to discuss that. So you can't say, I don't think it's a good idea to say, here is the change manager. He or she will take care of the change management. It's not going to work.
It happens a lot.
I know, but it's not going to work. I don't believe it's a good approach. Yes.
I think we get a lot of projects because both sides do the project, and why, when we go to the people for requirements gathering, then we explain the why, but they aren't very convinced of the why. So then it's difficult to make them through the change when they aren't convinced that there has to be a change.
Yes, so if people have the comment is, if people, we get kind of the instructions to launch a project and the why is given by management, but people don't always buy into the why, so it's difficult to make the change happen. Absolutely, and I don't think that is a problem that we can solve from project perspective. It's a more strategic perspective or challenge. We can, through, for example, one of these techniques, we can inform management that people don't understand or don't agree with the why. And then it's up to them to see, okay, how are we going to deal with that? And you might offer a few solutions or tips or pointers which direction to go. But ultimately, they will have to acknowledge that some work on the purpose of the change needs to be done first. Yeah. So I think we can highlight it, but we can't solve it all on ourselves.
Yeah, I get that now. Mostly when I get the requirements, I try also to think about the user friendliness of the new application, if it's possible, depending on the mandate we have. But in fact, if we are getting the requirement also to simplify the encoding of data or the way that you have less screens or less to get something done, after you could more easily get at least a part of the application that has a buy-in, because at certain point it simplifies something, but it should be possible, of course.
Yeah,
that can help.
So at usability concerned about the usability, the user experience, to make the change easier for people. Absolutely.
If they had an application that was difficult, and it's still a complicated application, but some of things are more think about how to simplify the work of the people, then at least you have something to buy to them.
Yeah.
To sell to them.
Absolutely. Use usability as a kind of way to make it easier. I agree with that.
At least to the some.
Absolutely. Because often the reason why people are going into resistance is because something is not as quick, it's an additional click, or it's more ugly, or whatever. And sometimes that is the actual reason. Yeah. You wanted to add something also, Joris?
Well, on the one you get, let's say some resistance on that, or people don't understand the why. You should try to find why they don't understand the why, or why, and not, let's say, not go into conflict with those people, but get information out of it and give that feedback to the management, because probably there is a good reason why they don't want it or why they don't see it.
Yeah, understand why people don't understand the why.
Try to convince them,
Yeah. Don't try to convince them, but use the deep listening to really understand what is their concern. Yes, Karl?
And also the image that you told that you should get together the users and the sponsors, or that you have contact, because I think indeed if you try to co-create with those who have impact and are impacted, and you put them together, you have that listening moment, and you can introduce the why, or a conversation about the why, without having the groups separated.
Yeah.
And have this understanding that why are they doing this? We don't want it, but you have the better understanding from that putting together of the stakeholders.
Yeah, so the feedback here is by bringing people together, powerful and powerless, between big quotes, people, you can create a shared understanding on the change and on any concerns about change. And so absolutely, I agree with that. And I was going to say something else. It relates back to our role as being the spider. We create the conversation, we enable the conversation between people. We don't necessarily, or we rather are not a person translating information from one group to the other, or relaying information, because you always lose information, you always get lost in translation. So this is a key element here of being the spider.
The people get the impression that you're the messenger of bad news.
Yes.
And if you're acting like a spider, then that's
you bring people together. Yeah. Yeah. And if management sees someone struggling with the change, they will understand it better than when you give them the dry facts. Think about the spaghetti example. Bring them close to the spaghetti, or the person eating the spaghetti, instead of saying he didn't like the spaghetti. So what? He has to. Yeah. Okay.
We have no more. Have says very interesting discussion and presentation, but I have to go.
Okay. Well,
good feedback there.
We're just finishing. So if there are no more questions, thank you very much. By the way, small commercial break before I close, because you mentioned this technique. This is one of the 25 techniques in the book. Feel free to have a look at it. Before we close, I would like to thank you, and you are going to give people a little bit of information on the next events, or should I do that?
If you forward the slide so I can read.
There we are.
Okay, so what else does the IIBA do? We have a weekly online BA cafe, which is over Zoom, I guess.
Yes.
The link is there. You don't need to register, just come. I've never been, but maybe I should. could be useful. Then we have the next event, 21st of March, the Conscious BA with Steinar Plaats and Johan Merks in Berchem. So that's for the people who would like to go to Antwerp or anywhere in the world. You can just watch online, like today. And of course, there is also the big annual conference, BA and Beyond, in Belgium, but also Netherlands, which is the 22nd and 23rd of May of this year.
So we have a nice conversation right away, and then I hope to see you again at one of these future events. Thank you very much for your attention and interesting questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.